So hopefully I'll just talk a little bit, but we'll get into doing an activity, which is what I know that we enjoy. But it's related to this conscious leadership tree. So where does this come from? So about a year or so ago, we invested as a community in identifying conscious leadership as the direction that would represent what we stand for, what we're about. And then the work was, what do we mean by conscious leadership? So through the summit last year especially, we took the effort to aggregate thinking from the community and put together a position paper, right? And you've seen this model that showed up around awareness, intention, and action, right? So it's how we were saying this is what conscious leadership's about. And we were saying that it's also a journey across several different layers, that it's a journey of self, it's about our interpersonal relationships that people felt very strongly about. How do we work with each other? How do we treat each other? Those were very central of what people wanted to work on. But how do we actually build cultures and transform organizations was yet another layer. And also this community is concerned about the greater level of community and society. And so we're thinking, what does conscious leadership look like at that level? So there's some language that you can see at the top here that was in that paper that defined these notions of conscious leadership. And I'll call out some words that were expressed in there. Conscious leadership fosters a kinder and more inclusive place for all. So you just came out of a session talking about inclusion and belonging. That we wanted it to be about growth and advancement. We know that it's about how do we get beyond where we are? How do we continue to grow as human beings? But it's also about positive relationships and improving organizational productivity and sustainability. Those are important ideas and something that elevates our collective impact. So those were some intentions that were articulated in the paper. And thinking about, again, the roots of the tree, that there were some key ideas expressed in this paper that are reflected in what got us to the conscious leadership tree. So it was about these ideas of developing and enabling us all. So it was about this idea that perhaps had come from the earlier phase of democratizing leadership development, that we wanted this to be inclusive, something that could be relevant to a large number of people. And that we wanted to move the collective capacity for leadership, that it wasn't about a solo act or singular leaders that were going to solve all the problems. Is how do we make sure that we have a foundation of leaders at the base where everybody could have the opportunity to grow and impact change, right? So we wanted to be able to offer development at scale. So this idea that connects back to the democratizing idea was important because we wanted to be able to reach a lot of people. And as we know with the gatherings that we do with the leadership forum, they tend to be relatively small. There's only a certain number of people that get to come here and participate. How do we create impact in the wider world? That's a question that we held. And then we also recognize that there are many models and approaches to leadership development that exist in the world, and that what we could do was to actually harness and broadcast those approaches. So it wasn't so much about saying, well, we need to create new ideas, new frameworks, new models, but could we be an aggregator, a disseminator of conscious leadership? You'll see this visual that's there. How many of you are familiar with that model or that tree, which is called the Tree of Contemplative Practices? Have you seen it before? Not many. So I think this was created by the Center of Contemplative, might have been Contemplative Practice. And what they did was Lynette, are you looking for your phone by any chance? Okay, it's up.
Very conscious of it.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a way to actually say that there are lots of wisdom practices, practices around mindfulness, and they organized it. So it gave us a way for thinking about what we were doing. That was this frame of the conscious leadership tree. So the intentions that we held were saying that we wanted to create something that was about curation, not necessarily about creation. So we didn't necessarily set out to create something new, but what we wanted to do was take good stuff that existed out into the world. We wanted it to be inclusive, that we wanted to make sure that people could have access to it rather than exclusive. So once again, there's a lot of leadership resources out into the world, but maybe you have to be a client of an organization, maybe you need to be a member, maybe you need to pay something, or you have to invest the effort in being able to find it. So that creates or limits the level of access that we could have. So you want to make sure that we could draw those boundaries. So this resource is meant to be a gift from our community to the world, something that people all around the world can access. It won't have a fee attached to it, and hopefully expand the practice. And we wanted it to be also about not just theory and ideas, but also about application. We recognize that leadership, at the end of the day with our model, is about action, but coming from a place of awareness and intentionality. So we wanted to make sure that this could be a resource to moving conscious leadership in the world. So let's take a look at what this looks like. It's live now. You can go to consciousleadershiptree.org or consciousleadershiptree.com, and both of those URLs will take you to a resource page on our website. So let's see if this works. Ta-da, there it's up here. So what you'll see is this is the landing page, the home page for the site. And so there's a bit of a description about what this is about. And it then leads into a search capability. And there are 3 levels of search here. One is that you can do a keyword search, so you can type in a word, such as belonging, for instance, or action learning, or trust, and you'll find related content there. Then there are some drop downs in those 4 categories that we identified: self, others, organizations, and society. So if you hit the drop down, you'll see the assets that are listed in that category. And finally, that there are tags, because as we built the assets, they have tags there. So we talked about action learning yesterday. There's adaptability, agile. So you can see that there are something in the order of about 50 tags that are there. So those will take you, let me hit the one around change, for instance. It'll take you to a listing of assets that have that keyword embedded in them. Should be able to find things. So the main thing that we wanted to do today is to introduce you to this, and there's a lot of content that you can go and browse on your own. But as I mentioned, that it is about action, about helping move the needle on change. So the one that we thought that we would do and look at is this one called vertical development. So let me type it in here. You can see a few things came up, but there's the one in the middle around vertical development. And so let's take a look at what a singular asset looks like here. You'll see, of course, that there is a title. There's a quick summary of the concept at the top. There's a section that talks about the usage. So how might you be able to use this resource? Where might you apply it? Then there is a deeper description of the content, so an unpacking of what it's about. And you get then to a certain kind of sample activity that you can actually use. So if you're a facilitator, or if you're a coach, you're a trainer, you're working in people development, there's a suggested activity that you could use to actually teach, share, put into practice this concept of vertical development. It's just a sample idea. Scrolling down further, you come to a listing of tags that might be associated with this idea. There's a section about audiences that this might be relevant to, again, leading back to some of those key audiences that we're targeting. And then there is a section of links that are connecting to where this knowledge base is reaching into. So once again, the curation function is to say that what we want to do is take good stuff that exists in the world, and we want to distill it in and make it more accessible to people. But people want to say, well, where's this coming from? I want to go deeper. And so you can hit the links, and you'll have the opportunity to find more resources related to the concept. And there's a little piece at the bottom that says, got feedback or input, so you can also hit that, because we've just built this, and it's like an MVP now. You know, it's minimal viable product, and we want to continue to refine and grow it. So as people look at this, they might have some suggestions of additional resources or additional content that we might add. So there's a section for that there. So that's what it looks like. But like I said, there's content here, and it's hard to digest what this is about or get a feel for it. So wanted to move into actually doing an activity related to vertical development that relates to the content here. Sound good? Before we go there, any thoughts, questions? Yeah, please.
Will there also be like assessments as far as like the organization cultural audit, like other resources such as that on this as well?
Yeah, there could be some. So what we tried to do was not necessarily make this a marketing zone for proprietary paid products, and a lot of assessments are things you have to pay for. But to the degree that there are some that are available online that people could use, we pointed towards them. But the site itself doesn't have assessments. In some cases where people have contributed, there are some downloads. It doesn't show up on this page because there isn't a download, but on some pages there's a download button that'll give you a resource, a document that might have something like an assessment there attached to it. But it's something that, again, if that's an interest or a need, that's some place where you can provide us with feedback and we can look to actually grow this as we move downstream. Yeah?
Lyndon, what if people see this and say, I have something I'd want on there? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's where the feedback section at the bottom could be a way for people to offer us some input as to some content they want to contribute, or something can enhance the existing content that we have. Yeah. So I had a quick slide or two to play out what conscious leadership or vertical development looks like. And I think vertical development is an idea that is somewhat similar to conscious leadership. So it's a concept that's rooted in both ancient and modern theories. So I come from India originally, and you can think about the system of the chakras, which is a journey of consciousness from lower to higher. You know, at the higher levels, it looks like oneness and enlightenment, right? But at the base level, it's a sense of disconnection and not belonging. But it also exists in leadership practice at places like the Center for Creative Leadership, where the frame of vertical development is used for this journey, sometimes called the leader order of development, from the work of Bill Torbert, Robert Keegan. There's lots of folks that have been thinking about how do leaders evolve to being more effective, to work with greater levels of complexity. What differentiates it from the notion of horizontal development is much more about the acquisition of knowledge and skills. So if you will, you might know how to do things, you might be skilled at practicing them, but what's missing in the horizontal equation is the rationale. What are you putting this content, this resource, this capability to use for? What are you trying to do with it? So the vertical development becomes the journey about character, it becomes about intention, it becomes about awareness, it's about integration, it's about dealing with greater complexity. So it's not necessarily what you know, but what you're trying to do with what you know, the capability. So if you think about people like Mandela and Gandhi, you know, certainly they were knowledgeable people, but it wasn't about how smart they were, right? It was what they were choosing to use their capabilities in service of. So vertical development is very much about that journey. So it's a journey really of consciousness, about seeking to put what you have in service of some higher outcomes. So it's then a journey of really different levels of capability, but dealing with the things that we need today, right? Greater level of complexity, you know, thinking more strategically and clearly about where we're trying to go, working much more interdependently with different groups of people versus the independent orientation that is trying to seek the good of a certain group, but saying how do we move together collectively, right? And it's about certainly the thinking, but it's also about action. So these are all coming together in this concept of vertical development. And typically, as I mentioned, it's been broken down most often into 7 stages of what this journey is like. I like a certain kind of simplification of this, which is about 3 stages really. It's moving from zones of being dependent. So somebody has power, I might not have power, I'm dependent on them. We've noticed those cultures and organizations where there's a lot of hierarchy, not a lot of equality, to moving to a more independent orientation where everybody feels empowered, but the problem there is what? The one of coordination. Everybody's doing their own thing, but we're not necessarily working together. So where a lot of societies, organizations are trying to go to is this place of interdependence, which is saying that we are capable, we are empowered, but we have an intention to actually harmonize, to work together for the greater good, this journey of interdependence. So this journey of the 7 layers is this very much this journey from dependent to independent to interdependent. And somebody really defined, it was Bill Tobert actually, he said the term actually, instead of interdependent, it should be inter-independent, because we don't necessarily leave independence behind. We're individual people, right? And we are working for some goals that are related to where we come from. But we need to understand we've got to harmonize those needs with other people. We have to find a way for our needs to come together with other people. And that's where the work of what this looks like at a higher level. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. So this journey of development, there is a guy by the name of Nick Petrie who did some work to talk about vertical development, and he talked about not only what it is, but how do you actually create this change? How do you do this journey? And he named 3 things that are up on the screen here that you'll also find in the assets. The first one are what he called heat experiences. And these are things that we do. We talked about action learning yesterday, right? It's actually putting yourself into zones of challenge. And why this is important is when we are tasked with doing something that we don't know how to do, it forces us to leave behind some of the assumptions that we have, our ways of working. So in many ways, these challenging experiences, these heat experiences, start to crack us so that we can open up to something beyond that, right? So that's one zone. The second one is colliding perspectives. And by this, he means actually dealing with people who might have a different perspective. So we were talking about frames yesterday, and this is about being able to switch that frame and encounter somebody who might be thinking about things in a different way. And once again, this forces us to step outside of our own worldview, our own understanding of things, how things are. And I think this morning, as Chris was talking about what AI might do, part of it was give us a different perspective than from what we are operating from, to let us look at the world in a different way. And the third one then is really about meaning making. If we are seeing things that don't fit our current paradigm, our ways of working, or we're hearing perspectives or insights that don't connect with where we are, we have to somehow synthesize and make sense of that. So this elevated meaning making is a part of that journey. There's a fourth one that I might add, which isn't reflected here because it's kind of taken for granted, and it's really about sometimes codified knowledge. So coming back to Mandela, so he spent 20-some years in a jail cell, and he didn't have a lot of opportunity to engage with a lot of people or do things when he was in there. He was certainly doing things, and he certainly had conversations with other prisoners. But he was reading a lot as well. He was reading books and texts from around the world. People like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, consumed a lot of input from around the world. So I don't want to negate that. But in a way, when you get input, you get books, you get content, that it isn't what you're ready for, it's like noise, right? It just doesn't make any sense. So in a way, it's when you hit the zone where you're wrestling with certain ideas, where if you can get those inputs, they start to become meaningful. So yesterday, Joel said there is a saying like the teacher and the student create the learning. There's also another one, another Zen saying that says, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? So sometimes it's being ready in that zone on the cusp of struggling with these challenges when they have the opportunity to actually learn something more. So I'll pause again here. Any thoughts, questions about what you see here about the journey of vertical development? And as you think about the journey you want to make, maybe a question is, what are some of those things that might be out there that you might need to push yourself into, taking on a bigger challenge, a difficult challenge that forces you to think beyond your ways of working, your assumptions? Who is it that you might need to connect with who challenges you, for instance? And how do you resolve some of those challenges so that we can rise above to synthesize, to integrate these sometimes paradoxical or conflicting perspectives? So those are some of the things, and it's really by doing them that we have the opportunity to grow to different levels. Because again, if we are working with people who are our tribe, who see the world the same way, who agree with us, chances are that's not changing us. It's not adding value to where we are. It's sometimes the opposing things that are helping us with the growth that's there. All right, so we've been talking much more about the individual journey, the vertical development journey, but we also talked about vertical cultures, right? How can cultures to move to higher states? And we recognize that it's important, and the theme of our summit this year is about culture, right? So how do we create collective cultures that reflect higher states of being, that have more integrative, more inclusive, greater ability to deal with change and ambiguity? How do we build those kinds of cultures? So there's some assets on the conscious leadership tree that are related to that. So about interdependent cultures, how do we thrive together? There's an asset that is a contribution from Anne, who's in the room here, that she did some work that she's done really thinking about how that we are organized into tribes and what that means for us. There is the concept of Ubuntu. So one of the things that is in this asset is that, some of the feedback that Chris showed up is that a lot of what's in perhaps the position paper comes from a Western source. So we've got on the asset, we've got more resources that are also drawing from other perspectives. So there are perspectives from Japan and Korea and India and Africa and Native American traditions. So Ubuntu is one. It's a great tradition out of Africa that translates into I am because we are, and it's trying to harmonize individual needs with collective needs, and how might those coexist. So there's an asset of that. There's one on agile leadership. So many of you are familiar with the name of the general who wrote Team of Teams. Anybody remember? Yeah, Stanley Crystal. And so he was really operating from zones of great complexity and change and saying, how do you build this capability into team structures where they could move very quickly, but also move interdependently. So then there's an asset on agile leadership drawing from that perspective. There's an asset related to what Paul shared yesterday around trust, drawing on some of his works. You'll find a lot of things that are taking some of these vertical ideas and exploring them in the context of culture. So there is an ask, and this is a couple of slides that we'll leave you with. So the tree is, as I mentioned, it's an MVP. We created it over the past 6 months, and we just launched it. So we'd love for you to take a look at it. And over time, we hope for this to grow from perhaps 50, I think we have 52 assets, maybe getting it up to about 200 assets to enriching it. And in order for that to happen, we'd love to get your input. So I'll talk about that in a moment. But in order to also seed it out into the world, as Joel mentioned, we'll be doing some more of those monthly CLT sessions where we might focus on a key theme and do an activity like we did today. So it helps us deepen our understanding of the conversation and connect with each other around a particular theme. So look forward to some of those sessions. And we're also going to do more social media, where we'll try to distill some of this content out and push it out in social media as a way of bringing more people into the community. So our ask here is for you to give it a try, go and explore, see what you can see there, and then give us feedback, share it with your networks, push it out to other people who you think might find it useful. As we mentioned at the bottom, as you explore things and say, well, there's some additional things that I could think would be good to have in here, or some changes I'd suggest, some new links, resources, let us know about that. There's a feedback link. And also you can contribute. All of the people in the room have bodies of knowledge, your own work, or things that you use that you think might be helpful. So bring those back in so we can continue to grow this tree. And there's also a third level, which is really about sponsorship. So we have the Kellogg Foundation that provided resources that helped us on this journey. So yeah, round of applause. So if there are organizations, yours or others that you know of, that would be willing to fund or sponsor some of this, then the opportunity would be to underwrite this so the organization's name and logo will be acknowledged on the site. Like I say, this is a contribution from our group to the world. So certainly encourage you to think about how you can help grow it, put it out into the world, and help expand it. So that's certainly an ask here. So we built something that is the start of something bigger, hopefully. And wanted to close out with this quote that some of you might know from Confucius. It says, you want 1 year of prosperity, grow grain. 10 years of prosperity, grow trees. If you want 100 years of prosperity, grow people. And I might add culture. So this is fundamentally thinking about how do we collectively grow as people to create a greater world, a better world, which is the aspirations of this community and conscious leadership.